Anything like this before. But so tonight tonight is the night for this wonderful thing called the Brownstone Prize. Yeah. And I think we know the name of our guest of honor, but before that happens, I will say this, that Brownstone's been around now for 4 years, I guess going on 5, and we seem to be through the dark times, and we're in the rebuilding stage, and it occurred to me that rather than just giving a single Brownstone Prize, we should make up for lost time, and we should give 3 instead, right? Yeah. But the other 2 do not know. Yeah, I think we've more or less kept the secret, have we not? Yes, we have. Yeah. When Brownstone started, Martin Kulldorff, who's quite the visionary, said, and oddly, Martin has this way of speaking where you just have to listen. And everything he says seems canonical and true, right? And he said the main job of Brownstone is to restore the culture. And that means you need somebody who understands something about culture, and a cultural historian more than anything else. And it just so happens that we have a cultural historian among us who also is a very good friend to all of us and a brilliant intellectual, underappreciated intellectual. So I'm very pleased to give the very first Brownstone Prize to Thomas Harrington.
Wow, Jeffrey.
You might have picked up, there's a little bit of a dynamic between Jeffrey and myself. He likes to catch me off guard. I think he succeeded again tonight. What can I say about this? Brownstone, during these last 4 years, has provided me, in these times of widespread tragedy, with some of the most wonderful experiences of my intellectual life and of my fraternal life. This organization has done an amazing thing. There are many organizations that are political and are lobbying groups, and we are that in an implicit sense. We're sending people into important places. But the engine room of the whole operation is thought and ideas. And now that the university has become a place where thought and ideas and the free exchange of ideas is not really what it's all about, this place and others like it, but I think this in a special way, has become where we do thinking and dialoguing. Jeffrey's heard, and maybe some of you others have heard, how I go on about the table. And I think I mentioned it yesterday in my remarks. The table being the place where, in relaxed but yet rigorous terms, we learn how to be human. We learn how to exchange ideas. We learn how to look other people in the eye. We learn how to read their body language. We learn how to do a lot of things that make us human and that will keep us away from the scenario that Walter talked to us about last night. And so I think a lot of the genius here and the joy here is that in a time of very great darkness, and I think all of us keep that intellectual understanding of the great darkness at bay, although we admit it to ourselves in the intellectual realm. Makes me think of Gramsci's famous quote, I'm an optimist, how does it go? I'm a pessimist of the mind and an optimist of the will. And I think that's what we're doing here. We're pessimists of the mind in the fact that we use our analytical abilities to see what's going on, and yet we decide that in the face of it we're going to do something optimistic and life-affirming. And so Brownstone has been immeasurably important to me, and I like to think that maybe I've contributed in some way to it, and I'm most of all, very grateful to have been part of it. Thank you all very much. Wow.
We kept the secret, huh, Tom? Yeah, okay, good. That's good.
You caught me off guard again.
In many ways, oh, you have to take your box. Yeah, part of the protocol. I'm inventing these protocols as we go along here. All right. In so many ways, we live in the age of science, right? Everybody says. But we experienced a crisis of science, and we lost track of what that really is. But there's been one man who's been keeping us on track with indefatigable work in a public sense, unrelentingly, also a refugee from the academy, but a great inspiration, adaptable mind, and a great explainer, teacher, and friend to us all. And so the second Brownstone Award tonight goes to Brett Weinstein. Brett.
Wow. I am honored beyond words by this. And of course, I don't have anything prepared to say because you did successfully keep the secret. In some ways, I'm going to repeat what Walter told us last night and what Tom just told us. I think this is kind of the theme that is emerging out of Brownstone, and it couldn't possibly be more important. There's a built-in feature of humans. It's not widely recognized, but I'm all but certain that this is accurate. We have a couple of different modes. We have a mode for when times are good, and we pass on the wisdom of the ancients, and we learn to deploy it. And then we have a mode for when something has gone wrong, and we have to do something different. And this is the mode of consciousness, which has been widely misunderstood by science because our own experience of our personal consciousness is so vivid that we assume that must be the fundamental element of consciousness. But it can't be. It's a paradox, and you will hear the hard problem of consciousness befuddles scientists because it doesn't make any sense as an individual phenomenon to have a subjective experience. How does that help anything? The subjective experience is there so that we can exchange ideas between us. The fundamental nature of consciousness is intersubjective, and the reason that it evolved is because it allows us to do much more than we could do as a group of individuals thinking alone. We have to be able to exchange ideas in order to test them and to figure out what it is that we don't yet know, to basically bootstrap our way to a new way of being. And what Walter told us last night, which I must say landed for me like a lightning bolt, was that this state in which we plug our minds into each other in order to figure out what it is that we are to do next is not only in jeopardy, which is clear, but it's also fairly new, which is part of the reason it's in jeopardy. But this is not always the way that Homo sapiens have thought. And so what I'm struck by is that Jeffrey has, I think largely by intuition, found all of these important elements necessary to reboot that instinct in us, right? The asking us to dress up, causing a room full of people to figure out how the heck you're going to take your formal clothes on an airplane and not wrinkle them all to hell. I mean, it's not an easy task, and it's not an easy thing to ask people to do because everybody will go through that trauma. But Look at us, right? Somehow we've shown up in formal dress, and it matters in ways that I couldn't explain to you. I'm not sure if Jeffrey knows what he was trying to accomplish, but he knew it was important, right? The chamber music, the fact that most of us may never have stood there and listened to chamber music and don't know exactly how it is that we are to react. These are important things. Why? I don't know. But they got us this far. And so in some sense, rediscovering these processes and not overthinking the question of why are they important and is it really so significant that we resurrect them? Yes, it is for some reason. So please, Jeffrey, keep doing what you're doing.
Wow, this award takes me back to the dark days. I guess, Jay, the first time you and I talked about what was happening to the world was maybe over the summer, and you said in a pleading way, you said we have to do something because everything is falling apart. Everything is falling apart. This can't go on. This can't go on. And Jay left his life as a quiet, happy, a peaceful academic, and threw himself into public life, giving us not only the Great Barrington Declaration, but much more besides. And when I think about Jay, I think about science, I think about erudition, a great media presence, right? But beyond that, I think above all else of moral courage to do what's right when history calls you. So, Brownstone Prize for 2025, Jay Bhattacharya.
This is the most fun I've had in 10 months. I've just, because Brett praised Jeffrey in the way he did, I'll start with a quick anecdote, which has nothing to do with the theme of what I'm going to talk about tonight. But the first time I actually physically met Jeffrey, I owned one suit. It wasn't this one, and my mom had bought it for me in high school. And the button was coming off. And so the first thing Jeffrey did, he looked at me, he said, "Your button's coming off." And then he took my suit and he put the button back on. I don't know if you remember this, Jeffrey. He does. Now I had to buy several new suits for my new job, but so that's another thing. Which is a terrible, terrible job, by the way, but that's another thing. Okay, so I wanted to go back to those dark days because I think it's important that we revisit them. And the theme of my what I'm going to talk about tonight is motivated again by something that Jeffrey I think you tweeted. Have you noticed how difficult it is to get people to talk about the dark days? People have forgotten. Have they forgotten? Why can't we get people to think about those dark days, revisit them? In 2021, I think it was March, Martin Kulldorff and I wrote a very hopeful op-ed and published in the Wall Street Journal essentially with the title is "We Need a Coronavirus Reckoning." We use the word reckoning. It was more of a positive thing. It was like a morbidity and mortality conference. After a patient dies, the doctors in the hospital go sit and say, "Well, what went wrong?" There's no blame placed. There's just a consideration what went wrong, so that we can figure out how to do better next time. March of 2021, we wrote this thing. It's what is it, like November 2025, and we haven't had one. We haven't had one. Now, it's not strictly true, right? So countries have spent millions and millions of dollars. The UK has spent, I think, $100 million, some crazy amount of money for a coronavirus task force that's produced dreck, that has not actually grappled with the key question, right? And let me just articulate what the key question actually is. The key question is, could the lockdowns happen again? Could they happen again? Who says no? Who says yes? I think that the yeses have it. I am too. The schools that closed, the kids are still suffering from that. The years of, you can look at these clinical studies of learning loss, and you can understand that these kids, that there's no fully recovering from the depression, the anxiety, the years of life that we rob from our kids. You can look at the churches that closed. The church I attended in California, it almost died. At one point, I was an elder at the church. I was serving communion outdoors, drive-through communion. The car would come up. Father Noggles is absolutely horrified by this. And 2 cars came up that entire morning. And it was like 10. There were 10 people. And we've seen a revival, but the revival are people directly linking it to the dark days? Why have we seen this revival? There's this displacement. People won't talk about what happened, but there is. I'm an optimist. There's a sense of there are new things happening. Business is closed, but now the stock market's way up again. Our speech was censored. How many of you got bumped off Twitter back then? How many? And that's not happening anymore because Elon Musk bought Twitter, I guess. We had all these things that happened, absolutely catastrophic things that we were certain our civilization was far past, and yet they happened, and we still can't grapple with it. We still can't grapple with it. So I want to bring us back to the dark days, just because I think we have to grapple with it, and we have to figure out how to grapple with it. And I think, to me, that's the most important part of what Brownstone is doing. I mean, there's so much else. Like, it's not just about the lockdowns anymore. It's about a fundamental culture shift, a group of people who I mean, are so different in so many ways, think very, very differently from one another, have different backgrounds, and yet somehow we're tied together. I feel like I'm at home. But we have to understand what happened in order to understand how to turn the page, to come to terms with the question, and so that when will we know that Brownstone is a successful organization? When we can all confidently answer, could the lockdowns happen again? And the answer is no. But we're not there yet. Okay, so I have a few notes to put us back in the mindset of March of 2020. And these are distressing notes. So what is it? A trigger warning. That's right. Let me give you a trigger warning. March of 2020. The schools closed. There's that famous press conference where Tony Fauci stands in front of the President of the United States, becomes the de facto President of the United States, announces the lockdowns. I remember thinking to myself that once you take this step, that you told people that this terrible disease is going around, you are at risk of dying, and that we have to do this extraordinary thing of stopping society, that it was going to be almost impossible to reopen because of the fear induced. Now, if you think back to then, how many of you, most of you probably were already rebels, but like if you think back to that time, how many of you thought that the lockdowns were going to be unpopular very soon? I thought that. It was one of the many things I was dead wrong about. Almost immediately became clear that the lockdowns were popular, deeply popular, that there were only a few crazy people who disagreed. Let's go back one more month to February 2020. in February 2020, the establishment was still sane. COVID was here, but the establishment was sane. There was a big Chinese New Year celebration. You remember that in San Francisco? And Nancy Pelosi went and hugged a Chinese person, which I guess was the thing to do. To tell President Trump to not to like discriminate against Chinese people, also to be calm about this new deadly disease that's going around. Let's think about it more rationally. Tony Fauci gave interviews where he talked about how it was a bad idea to wear masks because there was no evidence behind them. Remember that? There were op-eds in the Washington Post that were almost identical to the Great Barrington Declaration, published in February 2020, but published by prominent Harvard professors, not Martin Kulldorff, by prominent people saying we should just protect the vulnerable, and don't panic so much. The Great Barrington Declaration was just the standard way we dealt with pandemics, going back basically a century, right? In 1968, there was a massive pandemic that struck the United States, the Hong Kong flu. And I was not actually here for that. But Jeffrey, maybe you were? I don't know. Do you know how we dealt with it? We had Woodstock. We were so much more sensible then. The standard way of dealing with pandemics got utterly shattered in March of 2020. And now we're in a place where that standard way feels like ancient history. And where you all answered the question, most of you answered the question, could the lockdowns happen again? The answer is yes, they could, because there was a catastrophic break in time in March of 2020. And the path back won't be to just to wind back the clock and convince everybody that the old way of dealing with pandemics is right. Because it's not just simply a scientific change. There's a fundamental break that happened. In March of 2020, I was such a naive person. I thought the way forward was science. I published an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal where the title of the op-ed was "Is coronavirus as deadly as they say?" I'd done some back of the envelope calculations with the Diamond Princess cruise ship. You remember that? And it looked to me like the death rate, the infection fatality rate from the virus in the Diamond Princess numbers were like 0.2%, 2 out of 1,000. And there was this clear age gradient. It was the old people that really got sick on that cruise ship. The young people didn't. They didn't get very sick. That seemed to me like definitive, right? At the end, there was a great press conference involving Rudy Gobert. Who knows Rudy Gobert? Remember him? He's the Defensive Player of the Year that year in the NBA, a young, healthy NBA player, and he got COVID. And he gave a press conference where he was like making fun of it. He got up and he licked his finger. I'm not going to do it because everyone will kill me. But he licked his finger to lick the microphone, and then he was forced to apologize in this in the most sort of humiliating way for being young and healthy. You had this fundamental shift. Is the coronavirus as deadly as they say? The answer was no. It was true then, but when I published that piece in the Wall Street Journal, it was like heresy. I was at Stanford campus, and all of a sudden, I got 1,000. I mean, normally we'd get 100 emails. I got 1,000 emails excoriating me, saying, "Why am I abusing my position as professor?" Passing on false hope to people for a calculation I did. A month later, I ran a seroprevalence. Seroprevalence meaning how many people have antibodies in the population. In April of 2020, there were, in Santa Clara County, there were 50 times more people that already had COVID than the cases that I've identified. There are 1,000 cases been identified. We found the result of our study implied there were 50,000 people walking around that had already recovered from COVID. 40% of whom didn't even remember having any cold symptoms in the last 5-6 months. We ran a replication study of it in LA. We found exactly the same result. Then dozens and dozens of these studies started coming out. And I thought, the eve I had those numbers in my hand, we hadn't published it, we hadn't told the world about it yet, but the eve I had those numbers in my hand it was like April 5th, 2020, I thought, this will solve the pandemic. That's how naive I was. All we have to do is show people these numbers, and everyone will realize, will come to their senses. The schools will open, the businesses will open, the churches will open, the whatever restriction, this crazy groupthink that's happening will get shattered just by dint of a single number. The power of science. Boy, was I wrong. I mean, I was really, really wrong. Instead, what happened was a pretty vicious attack on me inside academics. Right. So I went through this dark period where it was really clear that my friends and colleagues wanted me out. They wanted me excommunicated. They actually did excommunicate my friend Scott Atlas, who was an advisor, because his additional crime on top of mine, wrongthink, was also advising the President Trump. And as a result, my colleagues excommunicated him with a faculty senate vote where the word anathema was used. It was a religious excommunication. Only recently, Stanford, the faculty senate, voted that they will never again in the future condemn a professor based on what they're thinking again. But they still didn't say that what they did to Scott was wrong. They still didn't say what they did to Scott was wrong. So what you had was heresy. I committed heresy. I was excommunicated, and I felt the anxiety of it. I mean, I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, until I decided that the obligation I owed to the people that I spent my life studying was more than the obligation I had to myself to be a fancy professor. And then. Never been more sure I made the right decision, but my God, it's been painful. By the way, I mentioned how terrible this new job I have is. It's just so. Okay. So March of 2020 was a break, a fundamental break in how we think. I'm really sorry I missed Walter's speech, because everyone has come up to me and told me about Walter's speech as a utterly mind-blowing exercise. I'm sorry I missed it, but I think I can sense it. There was a fundamental break in the way we think about each other and the world in March of 2020, and the point is that it hasn't been repaired. It may never, given what we've been through, we may never repair it. The question is, can we get to a place where it's better? My friend Matthias Desmet wrote a fantastic book about his idea of a mass formation hypothesis. Bob, I think I learned it first about Matthias from you. And it's a fantastic, interesting, amazing book. The key idea is that a mass formation hypothesis is when I wrote it down, a large segment of the population becomes entranced by a shared narrative or belief system, disregarding factual reality in favor of emotional or ideological conformity. Right? That's what happened to us. We became, not the people in the room, that you guys are special. That's why we're home. But we became entranced as a society with an idea. And the idea was that we're all going to die. That was the idea. We essentially created a cult of the coronavirus. And that cult took over our societies. Not just our societies, the entire world. What were the key things that enabled that cult psychologically? So I already mentioned this fear of death. You remember the World Health Organization? It put out numbers in early 2020 about the death rate from the coronavirus. Anyone remember the number? See, you guys are just, I don't even need to give this talk. I mean, I have to remind people, I actually wrote that in some scientific piece I wrote, and then I got all these like people in doing like public peer review of me saying, no, they didn't mean 3.4% infection fatality rate. But of course, what they meant was you should be really, really scared. We're all going to die. At least 3.4% of you are all going to die. The confusion between the infection fatality rate and the infection and the case fatality rate and infection fatality rate, that confusion was, it seemed to me, intentional, right? The infection fatality rate was 0.2%. The case fatality rate in the early days was 3.4%. Well, 3 out of 100 is a whole lot more scary than 2 out of 1,000, right? And so, why did the authorities do that? So I'm not going to be able to answer that question. I don't know the why of it, but I know that they did that. They scared the living daylights out of us. They exploited the authorities, meaning people like people in positions of scientific authority, of political authority. They exploited the innate fear that human beings have of infectious disease. Once when I was a med student, 100 years ago, I remember a patient that I was seeing along with a resident, and the patient had a history of bloody sputum, night sweats, doctors in the room. What am I describing? So the resident saw it, and he nonchalantly walked out and then mentioned it to the emergency room, and you could see fear in the eyes of the other doctors that was my observation as a medical student. I didn't know enough to be scared of it then. I actually, when I was a kid, I had a BCG shot, so I'm like, okay, I'm protected, but whatever, that's another, probably. So we have this lizard brain fear of infectious disease, and normally civilization exists because we have mechanisms to suppress that fear, right? We treat tuberculosis in a clean facility where they're not going to be exposing everybody else. We have antibiotics to treat them. Leprosy is still actually here with us, but we have ways of treating it. We have ways of managing it. If you're sick, you stay home, and so you don't get others sick. Sunetra Gupta, one of the most amazing scientists I've ever met in my life, she has this idea that globalization has made us into immunologically resilient people, right? So there's a fantastic book by Charles Mann with the title 1491 of what the New World was like in the days before Columbus, and Columbus arrives, brings with him lots of things, but in addition to what he brings with him smallpox and measles. And one of the themes of Charles Mann's book is that the New World was teeming with people before he arrived. Smallpox, within a century, wipes out 95% of the native population. The problem was that they were immunologically naive to these deadly diseases. In a sense, the globalized world that we have now, where we share germs with each other, make us much more resilient, not immunologically naive. Our civilization is a protection against this lizard brain fear we have of infectious disease. And what happened in 2020 was a leaning into that fear, an activation of that fear, so that we started to think of each other as mere biohazards. It's an inversion of the golden rule, like love your neighbor as yourself. No, think of your neighbor as a biohazard, as a threat to you. That's the height of virtue. We are simply supposed to treat each other as bags of germs. So that's why when you wore the mask and you didn't wear the mask and you're walking down the street and like walking near each other. I'm sure this happened to everybody, especially if you weren't wearing masks all the time like I wasn't. The person with the mask would jump off the street as you passed them. Remember that? Is it still happening? Oh my God. My friends, we are not mere biohazards. We're not mere biohazards. And civilization exists because we have convinced each other that we are more than biohazards to each other. So that's the public health authorities. Let me talk about science for a bit. Let me talk about the first scientific revolution. All right. So the first scientific revolution, the key idea of the first scientific revolution was that that ecclesiastical authority does not have perfect knowledge of all things. I'm a Christian. I believe that ecclesiastical authority has lots of knowledge about some of the most important fundamental things about the world, but not of all things, right? So Galileo, looking through a telescope of his own design and seeing the moons of Jupiter move, well, that trumps the idea, whatever ideas the ecclesiastical authority has. Like the ground reality of seeing the phenomenon was the basis of the first scientific revolution. The scientific establishment that we have now is, in a way, worse. We're in a worse situation than we were at the eve of the first scientific revolution. A few scientists control how everybody thinks about the physical world in every single field. There's often very different scientists. Tony Fauci being the probably most prominent example in infectious disease. But the ideas of a few people determine what we all think about a million different subjects. If you publish something in a top journal, that's truth. You guys were supposed to laugh at that. I don't know why you didn't. Ground reality does not determine truth in science anymore. That's the fundamental issue. In a sense, we are back where we were before the first scientific revolution. It's a root reason why, for instance, my study of the replicated study of the seroprevalence of COVID in early 2020 was rejected by the scientific community. It's because I was not one of those top cartel people that determined truth. I was just a scientist. If you think about the capacity to determine truth, how powerful is that? Right? The Soviets thought if you could determine what history was about, then you could control all of the present. Right? George Orwell thought if you could control language, that you could control how people think. Then that's the ultimate source of power. But even more fundamental as a source of power is the ability to control what everybody believes to be true and what everybody believes to be false. That's the situation we live in. It's more powerful than any medieval pope ever was. You could see it in the history of the Soviet Union, right? So Lysenko, a Soviet scientist of biology, he was convinced that Mendelian genetics was false. Someone like Brett Weinstein, if he'd stuck his neck out in the old Soviet Union when Lysenko was wandering around, Brett would have been sent to the Gulag. He sent many, many scientists to the Gulag just by outing them. So many biologists in the Soviet Union who knew better in the Stalin era kept their heads down because they didn't want to be sent to the Gulag. And as a result, Soviet agriculture stagnated and millions of people starved. Lysenko could control what the truth was, at least what the truth was acknowledged to be. Tremendous power. If you had thought about our society as a free society, well, the basis of our thinking about the United States as a free society is that the ability to control what truth is was too dispersed to be held in the hands of any single individual. And yet, in March of 2020, what we learned was that, at least in context of infectious disease and immunology, and actually so much else, public health, there were only a few people that got to decide what was true and what was false. And they convinced, as I said, that lockdowns were popular, really popular. So we're not that far off from that Lysenko world. And so what you have then is a fundamentally broken scientific sociology, a sociology of science that emphasizes authority rather than ground truth. Okay, another thing that contributed, I think, is a utterly incurious press devoted to propping up essentially a political party. I think that's too narrow a term. A powerful infrastructure. Essentially, what we have is Pravda. Right? So why are there all these hit pieces about Brownstone? Hit piece after hit piece after hit piece. Have you wondered that, Jeffrey? It's because you want to publish true things, and you are not part of Pravda. Right? The ability to speak to one another and tell people about the news is the goal of a free press, right? In a truthful way, and yet that's not what we had. It's not what we have. A free press would have treated these discussions as something to be. I mean, do I know that I'm right about all my scientific ideas? No, I don't know I'm right about scientific ideas. There are other people I learn from all the time. I change my mind a lot. A free press would treat science as something where, look, there are these people that disagree, and here's why they disagree. And yet, in the past decades or so, what the press has decided that it was going to take sides on scientific topic after scientific topic. Right? The global warming, I think, is probably what was when I first noticed it. But folks in the room will probably tell me that this happened even before. The idea that the press, in reflecting scientific debate, was doing something irresponsible was, I believe, itself irresponsible. Right? So, I mean, I've now got to know so many people in the press. I admire many of them. But just like scientists, they are not in possession of the truth, capital T. And so a kind of humility is necessary for a healthy society to have a press that reflects these kinds of scientific debates without putting their thumb on the scale too much. But that's not what we had, right? So, and you can see this in thing after thing after thing, right? So, was President Biden senile? Why did the press not report that he was senile until after the fact? Right? The last days of I keep coming back to the Soviet Union. The last day of the Soviet Union, you had a series of leaders. You had Leonid Brezhnev. You had Yuri Andropov. You had Konstantin Chernenko. You remember these folks? Were they senile? Were they old? Were they decrepit? I don't know. What I do know is that they were certainly old. But then, like when I was like 10 or something, they seemed really ancient to me then. But the point is that the press in the Soviet Union could not report fairly about them, honestly about them. Like they were overseeing a decaying infrastructure, a society that was on the verge of collapse, and yet they could not report that. And the question is the United States like that? I'd put forward the idea that the fact that the press no longer has a monopoly on communication, that Brownstone exists, that Substack exists, that X exists, is evidence that we're not quite so far along as the Soviet Union. But nevertheless, it felt like we were there in 2020. It felt like we were there. And it's not just this sort of like powerful political interest which I've been emphasizing. It's also the market. Right, I'm an economist. I used to think that the free market was the solution to everything. I no longer think that. Have you asked yourself why there are ads on TV for pharmaceutical products that maybe 3 people on Earth really need? Sometimes literally, like I saw an ad once I think it was an airport. A huge ad. I don't know how much it cost the pharmaceutical company to put it there for a cancer that 50 people a year get. Who are they advertising to? what is the purpose of those ads? The purpose of those ads are to make sure that the media where they put those ads do not criticize the pharmaceutical companies in ways that they otherwise would do, right? Essentially, it's a bribe. So the press then serves large political interests and large corporate interests. It's a recipe for when there is a mass formation, for that mass formation to be to be supported over and over and over again. Okay, I was having a conversation with Bobby Anner just a little earlier ago about the courts and Leslie Mnuchin about the courts. I was a expert witness for dozens and dozens of anti-lockdown, anti-church closing, anti-mask mandate, anti-vaccine mandate cases, all pro bono. I think I lost. I was doing some calculation, like $1 million, or $2 million, I don't know, whatever. It's money. That would have been blood money. I have to say that for the most part, it was a very disappointing and dispiriting view of the ability of the courts to decide to support basic rights that I thought that they were supposed to support. Right. So my governor back then was Governor Newsom of California. He declared churches were inessential, closed down the churches. In Santa Clara County, where I lived, the county sent spies into a rebel church that was still holding services because they thought they had freedom of religion, and they sent spies to go see if people were hugging each other in Sunday school. They used the phones we have. They can track exactly. If you turn your location on, you can track exactly where you are. The companies then they bought data from these companies of cell phone data to see if people were coming into the church on Sunday morning, and use that in court. In Idaho, a church organized a hymn sing outdoors in, I think, July 2020 or August 2020, and the police arrested the leader of the hymn sing. He was a massive rebel, terrible guy. I mean, we all don't want the hymn singers out there anymore. In Canada, they threw pastors in jail, and the courts over and over upheld those closures of churches until actually the Catholic Church in New York sued, and I think in February or March of 2021 was the first time we restored freedom of religion in this country, after a full year where we didn't have it. If you were a business and you were put out of business by these lockdowns, well, forget it. I mean, I was an expert witness in a case in Baltimore where a hardware store got closed down by a local public health authority. They closed down because you remember plexiglass? Once upon a time, it's gone now, but it was so scientific. The hardware store owner was being ordered by the public health authorities to put plexiglass around all around everywhere. Plexiglass. The daughter of the owner of this place, she was autistic and just couldn't stand being in an enclosed space, even though it was plexiglass and we all loved it. And he sued the county, saying, "Look, this doesn't make sense. Plexiglass doesn't stop you from getting the COVID," and he lost, right? And he's saying his business was going to go out of business, and it did. I mean, millions and millions of businesses went out of business, and the church and the courts did nothing, right? Do we have a right to property? Do we have a right to speech, right? Aaron's in the room somewhere. I don't know. So there's Aaron. Aaron and I were litigants in this case where we sued the federal government, Joe Biden, the Surgeon General. No. Don't clap. I think I have bad news about this. I think we don't have a First Amendment anymore as a result, in part of this case, right? So the case, essentially what it alleged was that there were government figures, the Surgeon General, the head of the head of the CDC, the people in the White House itself that were going to social media companies and telling social media companies who and what to censor. Right? Bobby Kennedy was on the disinformation dozen list. Right? And they were using academic institutions as essentially as cover to launder the censorship activities. So they fund the Stanford Internet Observatory. The Stanford Internet Observatory then goes, they, meaning the National Science Foundation, this actually happened. Then they go, the Stanford Internet Observatory goes to Facebook, says, look, we have a great algorithm for you to suppress the spread of misinformation, to censor the people, the bad people who do the bad thing. And because it's a fancy university with the aura of truth around it, they adopt it. On top of that, you have the White House, in this case, the Biden White House, going, and I'll just tell you a true story about this. Because we were in this lawsuit, this Missouri versus Biden lawsuit, we uncovered emails that showed this. The White House White House officials would go to the social media companies and say, you must censor these people. And there was this implied or else. They would call the social media titans into Congress and then yell at them, shame them. And what all of these companies did, until Elon Musk came along, was censor vast numbers of people, vast numbers of ideas, vast amounts of thought. Anything that was on this list would get censored. In the United States of America, we had essentially mass censorship, where the First Amendment essentially says that we're never supposed to have that, right? There's just one really funny story about this. So the Biden administration, when it first came in, went to Facebook and essentially threatened its existence unless it put in vaccine misinformation censorship, right? So Facebook, with these emails, these like toadying emails, they say, yes, master, we'll do this. And so they change their algorithms to identify misinformation, probably stuff you guys posted. And we're all guilty of the misinformationing. Remember in April 2021, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine? You remember what happened to that? So there was the CDC decided that it was causing strokes in women, and so it paused the vaccine for a week. In that week, the algorithms that the White House had induced had caused the Facebook to identify the White House as a anti-vax group, and it suppressed the spread of Facebook visibility of the White House. This is a true story. And so that there's these emails from the from the White House to Facebook saying, why is our page not trending? What have you done to us? And it turned out that they've been identified as an anti-vax. The Biden White House was the anti-vax group. Let's just have it out there. There's an irony in this. Like, so if you're a censor, the censorship, it's really hard to control that kind of censorship. The Twitter files, I was on a blacklist. I mean, in the United States of America, I thought those were the things that we got rid of in the 1950s. I was on a blacklist. The day I joined Twitter, the first thing I posted was the Great Barrington Declaration. And I was on a blacklist as a result of it. Elon Musk called me up on my own phone by myself, and he said he invited me to come visit him at Twitter headquarters, and I saw the computer file where it had a picture of me and it said blacklist right on top of it. The Missouri versus Biden case is a very dispiriting thing because we lost essentially in the Supreme Court. And the basis for the loss was actually very sneaky. It wasn't that we hadn't proved that there was censorship, because we had proved it. The basis for the loss was that me, Aaron, and others, we didn't have standing to sue. We didn't have standing to sue because we didn't find an email that said, you should censor Jay or you should censor Aaron. What we found were emails saying, censor these kinds of ideas, censor these kinds of people. So what now is essentially the law of the land is that if the government wanted to, it could go to social media companies, say, don't let these ideas spread. And if social media companies agree to it, and they might if we threaten them, then there's no remedy. The First Amendment, then, is an unenforceable dead letter. Now, President Trump issued an executive order on day one saying that we aren't going to do that in this government. But that's a flimsy read compared to what I would have thought, like the First Amendment, what I once thought the First Amendment actually was. An inviolable guarantee that in this country, our speech will not be censored by the government. The First Amendment at this point is in dire straits. Okay, all this depressing stuff. It's not enough for us to win, though, Aaron. What we need is an actionable thing that where if someone is censored by the government, that person, if just their ideas are censored, that person can sue. Yeah, like we need the First Amendment needs to be enforceable, and it's not. Okay. So what would happen today? I'll go back to my theme. I'm going to close up because I've kept you guys long enough. What would happen today if a new infectious disease threat appeared? Let me give you some good news and some bad news. All right. So let's start. Let me start with the bad news, and then I'll end with the good news. So the bad news is, in my opinion, the institutional response would lean toward the same tendencies. Right. The government would act the same way. The media would act the same way. The scientific establishment would act the same way. There's not a fundamental thing that's been learned because we haven't had this honest reckoning, this honest evaluation, an acceptance of what went wrong. People will just do the same thing. These institutions that we count on to protect our liberties would do the same thing. There's very few institutions that are fundamentally reformed as a result of the crisis of 2020. That's just a reality. And no honest postmortem. This is another one of these, like I was naive things. Jeffrey, you enabled this. We wrote this thing called the Norfolk Group document, and it was an outline of what an honest postmortem would look like. As best I can tell, 3 people have read it. I don't know. So there's a web page. You can go download it. It wasn't a Great Barrington Declaration. So. So I think that's the first thing. I think institutionally there's been almost no real response, no real reform. Now I say that, but at the same time, we have seen movement. The mRNA contracts that BARDA had are gone, right? Yeah. There's a sense, even in the New York Times, that maybe the school closures were bad for kids. You've seen some of those stories. So there's been some sprigs of hope, but nothing really fundamental or transformative, right? It's not like the Berlin Wall fell. Like we still don't have that Berlin Wall falling moment. In science, I'm not supposed to say much about my job as a condition of accepting this award. I told them I would just talk about my old work, so mostly I have. But I'll just give you the hint of one thing that if I can accomplish this one thing as NIH director, I think I will have done something really important. I want to launch the second scientific revolution. What does that mean? What does that mean? That means a very, very, very specific thing. I want replication, independent replication by other people to be the basis for scientific truth rather than authority. So when you go, imagine you do a search on one of those search engines for one of those boring papers that people publish. You look at the paper, and instead of telling you how many citations it has, you click a link, and it has a link to the data underlying the paper, and has a link to the replication studies that people have done on the paper. So you can a simple thing like that is completely transformative, because what it does is it says It's not that it was published in New England Journal that decides whether it's true. It's not that Tony Fauci wrote it that determines whether it's true. It's that other people, humble scientists looking at the same thing, find the same thing, or something very similar to the same thing. Looking at it from different points of view, find the same thing. Is there consilience? Is there different ways of approaching it that find the same answer? That's how you find it. That's what truth is in science. And if I can help restore that through the work I do at the NIH, I think that will be I'll consider the painful time in DC worth it. Okay, let me just end with the third thing. So I said the institutional response will be terrible. The replication reformation is the thing we need. But let me just say my main source for hope, and that is that in the answer to the question, what would happen today if a new infectious disease threat appeared, that would be different than what happened in March of 2020. There is now a vast army of people, and Brownstone, we're just the tip of the spear of it, a vast army of people that would say this was wrong before, and it's wrong, and we should not ever do it again. The protests that didn't happen in March of 2020, this time would happen. I have to say, I have to confess, I've never joined a protest. I've never, like carried one of those placards or anything like that, or marched in the streets. I'm just not that kind of person. But if there was a lockdown, you would find me out there with a placard. I'm just going to end with the idea about natural immunity. We have a natural immunity to the lockdowns, we in this room. I think millions and millions of people around the world also now have this natural immunity. And I think that if there were to be a new infectious disease threat, it would be very different, but just for that reason. The question is, will that outlast us? Will that memory die with us? Or can we reform society in a way so that that natural immunity becomes institutionalized and permanent? And that's what Brownstone's about. That's why I'm so proud, Jeffrey, for this medal. And I'm so proud of you all for, I've learned so much from all of you. And I've drawn inspiration from all of you, and I'm so grateful for all of you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Jay, and Tom, and Brad. Thank you. I'm so proud to look at these three medals there. It's wonderful. Yeah, it's beautiful. Gosh, I always rely on the priest to finish us off for the evening, and we don't have to go. I think the bar is still open, so right? So we don't have to go. We're going to hang around for a little bit longer. I want to thank you, Jay, for everything you've done. I do sense that we're at the very beginnings of what's going to be a very long struggle, and we're here for the long term, right? Yeah, it's gonna consume the rest of our lives, I'm afraid. But it's our job, it's our mission. It's what we've been tasked with. We are alive for a reason. We're all survivors here. We have a job to do. We've all been tasked with this job, to defend human rights, to defend human freedom, to defend scientific truth, to reconstruct, to rebuild. Jay, I think you agree with me. There were moments when we didn't know if we'd ever be here, right? We didn't know. And probably that's true for many of you in this room. There were moments over the last 5 years we didn't know if this opportunity would ever arrive. But here we are. We've been given these days. We're still breathing. We're still thinking. We're more ferocious than ever. We've learned. Let's go out and do this. We can rebuild. What they tried to destroy, we can rebuild. So thank you so much. And now, Father.
Building off Brett's comments about how Jeffrey encouraged us to do things that are marks of civilization, even if they're hard to pack for the plane, out of the Catholic tradition, starting tomorrow, All Souls Day, we particularly encourage a tradition that's all been lost. And I'd like to think it's a good homework for us. Visit a cemetery. A bunch of people died at various times, saints and sinners alike, but they passed civilization on to us. The very civilization that Jay warns us that we tried to end in 2020. At some point, we're going to be buried in one of those. And what we'll be judged by is how well we've done to pass that on to the generations that hopefully we'll be visiting when we walk through. Let us pray. Almighty God, the gift of breath of life to us is the foreshadowing of your Holy Spirit. Give us gratitude for those who have passed on to us wisdom, life, and knowledge and truth, and help us in that gratitude to live lives of love, not fear, lives dedicated to truth, lives dedicated of love of God and love of neighbor, especially those that will come after us. Inspire us with your grace and help us grow in this fraternity we have joined here today, that the love and truth that we celebrate here may redound to the entire world, starting in our local communities. Once again, we ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. May the blessing of Almighty God, the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit descend upon you all and remain with you forever. Amen.
Thank you, Brownstone. Good night. See you next week.